Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive ex-environmental engineer discovers a hidden pipe poisoning his land, he uncovers a toxic secret buried beneath suburban luxury. What begins as soil contamination becomes a war of wits, law, and revenge. In this neighborhood, justice flows both ways. I've always prided myself on knowing my land, every inch of it. 6 acres of Southern California soil, carved out and reclaimed after decades of chemical abuse by previous owners, now reborn into an organic sanctuary, my little green kingdom. Fruit trees ready to be planted in the lower east field, compost cycling like clockwork, worms fat and healthy, bees returning to hives I built myself. Nothing escaped my notice, and yet something had crept in, something vile and silent. It started about 6 weeks ago. I was prepping the lower field for new citrus when I noticed the soil near the boundary line, just below the slope where the land gently tilts toward the Hopkins estate, felt off, clammy, spongy. I crouched and pressed my palm against it. Warm, not sun-warm, chemically warm like a sponge left in used dishwater. The smell wasn't right either, not decay, not compost, not manure, something synthetic. Something artificial pretending to be natural. At first, I assumed a one-off chemical runoff, maybe someone washing their patio too aggressively. I ignored it. That was my first mistake. A week later, the moss came. Dense, unnatural patches clinging to my apple tree saplings and creeping over the mulch like an infection. At night, the earth itself began to emit a faint, sickly steam. It reminded me of my years in environmental cleanup. Back when I still worked in the corporate world, sites where fracking fluids had poisoned topsoil, where wastewater bubbled up from illegal injection wells. That same chemical haze. A ghostly mist rising from what should have been clean, proud ground. It was happening here, on my land. After the third evening of watching that phantom fog lift from the dirt, I dug out my old kit from the workshop. Moisture sensors, pH probes, ammonia detectors, equipment I hadn't used since I walked out on Delridge Industrial Remediation with a resignation letter and a middle finger. Within 48 hours, I had a rudimentary grid set up, triangulating the water flow and chemical composition at 3-hour intervals. The readings were not encouraging. Elevated nitrates, traces of chlorine, an acidic pH trending downward. And worst of all, positive tests for quaternary ammonium compounds, spa chemicals, disinfectants. None of it belonged anywhere near healthy soil. Rainfall could have explained some of it. A burst sewer line, maybe. But the thing was, every time it rained, the contamination lessened. When the skies were clear, the signals intensified. I checked the slope. My land sat below the Hopkins estate. Her manicured castle with its infinity pool, Roman fountain, and overpriced Mediterranean landscaping. That place dripped ego from its gutters, and apparently more than just ego. I knew Karen Hopkins. Not personally. She once left a glossy HOA brochure in my mailbox with a sticky note. Consider joining our community. Let's elevate the neighborhood together. I burned it in my fire pit. Her home stood just outside the official HOA map boundaries, but that didn't stop her from running the place like she was queen of Golden Hills. I didn't want confrontation, I just wanted clean soil, but things escalated when I found the pipe. It was buried just under 10 inches of turf where the sensor readings spiked hardest. At first I thought it was just a root, but the sound of hollow plastic under my trowel told me otherwise. I got down on my knees, started clearing the dirt, and uncovered what was clearly a PVC outlet, sealed badly, cheap fittings, and angled toward my property. I was too stunned to be angry. I grabbed my fiber optic inspection camera and snaked it down the line. The footage that came back made my skin crawl. Gray water. Frothy, greasy, full of solids I won't describe for your sake. Occasional pulses of bright blue liquid, pool treatment chemicals probably. And once, God help me, I caught a rush of something dark, thick, and unmistakably organic. It was a makeshift drain. Someone from the Hopkins side, had rerouted their waste system straight into the slope, letting gravity carry it into my land. This wasn't just gray water. This was illegal dumping. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. Not yet. I sat there in my tool shed, watching the looped footage over and over, sipping on the last of my homemade cherry wine, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. I knew what this meant. I'd seen it before. Wealthy residents hiding their runoff through natural filtration, knowing that enforcement was spotty and neighbors were too polite or too afraid to make noise. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The next morning, I sent the footage and sensor logs to my contact at the County Environmental Protection Division, Ramon, an old lab tech I once trained. I didn't make accusations, just asked him for an informal analysis and flagged it as potential code violation. No noise, no drama. Yet. I spent the day walking the perimeter, tracing slight depressions in the soil where heavy water had channeled over time. Small signs I'd missed. Erosion near the garden beds, wilting roots, worm die-off. My land was being poisoned from above. That night, I stood by the compost bins looking toward the glowing rooftop of Karen's mansion. Her hot tub lights glimmered like some suburban aurora borealis. I imagined her sipping Prosecco, scrolling through Pinterest boards about backyard zen, completely oblivious, or worse, indifferent, to the fact that she was turning my orchard into a septic marsh. I felt something shift in me. Not just anger, something deeper, a professional instinct, the kind of quiet fury that doesn't shout or throw punches, the kind that documents, builds cases, and brings people down one notarized paper at a time. You wanted to dump your waste on my land, Karen. You just flushed your problems to the wrong address. 3 days after sending the footage and soil reports to Ramon, I received a short email reply. Preliminary results consistent with chemical discharge. I'm recommending an inspection. Expect someone by early next week. I didn't reply. Just nodded to myself and went back to reinforcing the southern slope with temporary berms. Nothing permanent. Nothing that would violate code. Just enough to slow the flow in case she cranked up her magical mystery pipe again. The inspector showed up on a Wednesday morning, driving a dusty white county vehicle and sipping gas station coffee. Mid-40s, denim shirt, clipboard, tired eyes. His name was Dave. When he stepped onto my property, I handed him a printed folder with timestamps, photos, sensor readouts, and a QR code linking to the video feed. He raised an eyebrow. "You a scientist or something?" he asked. "Used to be," I said. "Now I just try to keep my tomatoes alive." Dave smirked, nodded, and started his walkthrough. It didn't take him long to find the pipe. I hadn't buried it again. He knelt beside it, sniffed, then checked it with a field test strip from his kit. It turned green, very green. "Jesus," he muttered. That was when the gate to the Hopkins property creaked open. Out she came. Karen Hopkins, president of the Golden Hills HOA, in full suburban battle dress, pastel blouse, high-waisted linen trousers, oversized sunglasses, and a Starbucks cup that looked surgically attached to her hand. Her expression was a practiced blend of confusion and passive-aggressive superiority, like she was about to reprimand a barista for using 2% milk instead of oat. "Oh, hi," she called across the fence, waving like this was a bake sale. "Is everything okay here?" Dave straightened up, brushing dirt from his jeans. "County environmental inspection, ma'am. Just checking a report of possible illegal drainage." Karen blinked with a practiced delay, her head tilting like she didn't quite hear him. "Illegal drainage? Oh dear, is that something on his property?" She gestured vaguely toward me, as though I were some unsightly lawn ornament. I said nothing, just watched her. Dave opened his folder, flipping through the documentation I'd given him. "Preliminary evidence suggests there's a pipe extending from your property into this one. It's discharging wastewater inconsistent with natural runoff." Karen's smile tightened like a drawstring purse. "That's absurd. We've only had standard drainage installed when we redid the patio years ago. Nothing goes anywhere. It's all filtered. We're very eco-conscious here. I'm even on a sustainability board." I watched Dave's face carefully. He had the patience of a man who had been lied to 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. "Do you mind if we take a look near your back slope, ma'am, just to verify source origin?" Karen's smile vanished. "Absolutely not. You can't just go poking around people's property. You need a warrant or probable cause or whatever," she snapped, her voice going up half an octave. Dave didn't flinch. "You're correct. This is a courtesy visit at this stage. However, we'll be filing an official request for access based on what we found here." Karen turned to me with venom wrapped in silk. "Is this about you not joining the HOA, Clark? Are you trying to make trouble again?" Honestly, this feels very personal. Now I laughed. Couldn't help it. I'd spoken to this woman maybe 3 times in the past 5 years, and all of them involved her asking why I didn't believe in community standards. Dave pulled out his phone, showing Karen a freeze frame from my footage. The glowing blue stream, clearly coming from under her spa deck, trickling into the pipe that led to my slope, her face drained of color. That? No, that's not. Someone must have installed something without authorization. I'll have to check with our landscaping team, or the pool contractors, or, look, I don't monitor every pipe on my property. You're listed on the permit as the owner, and project lead for the patio renovations in 2019, Dave said flatly. That cracked something. Karen's hands began flapping uselessly as she tried to redirect the conversation. Honestly, this man is always complaining. He built some kind of pump or machine right next to our lot line. I've seen it. He probably created the flow somehow. He's always messing with chemicals. He has a lab in his shed. This is harassment. Dave turned to me. You have a pump or active equipment on the border? Nope, I said. Just compost bins and a rain barrel. Solar panels? He asked. East facing. No runoff, I replied. Karen's voice rose in pitch. I want to speak to your supervisor right now. I am the supervisor, Dave said without blinking. And you'll be getting formal notice of investigation within 72 hours. I recommend you locate any blueprints, permits, or contracts related to your backyard plumbing. The county will be requesting them. Karen stood frozen for a moment, then stormed back into her property, slamming her gate hard enough to rattle the nearby bushes. Dave looked at me, mildly amused. She's a peach, he said. Organic, I replied. Yeah, rotten to the core. He chuckled, then went back to inspecting the pipe. If half the stuff in your report checks out, we're looking at a Class B violation. Maybe more, depending on volume. You'll need anything else from me? I asked. Not yet, he said, but if you've got more footage coming in, keep it rolling. This isn't over. I nodded. That evening, I set up a second fiber optic camera just beneath the retaining wall, angled upward toward the slope. If Karen tried to tamper with the pipe, I'd catch it. If she tried to pretend it wasn't hers, I'd have multiple angles, timestamps, GPS overlays, and chemical trace data. She had no idea who she was dealing with, but she would. Very soon. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from the County Department of Zoning and Municipal Oversight. Heavy cardstock envelope, red stamp across the front. Official, the kind of envelope that made even the most righteous man's pulse hitch. I slid it open with a pocket knife and scanned the contents, my eyebrows lifted by the second paragraph. According to the complaint, I had allegedly tampered with the natural grade of a bordering property, constructed an unpermitted drainage channel that interfered with community water flow, and, my personal favorite, intentionally destabilized a recognized HOA managed slope. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. She actually did it. Karen filed an official complaint claiming that I had damaged her property by digging unauthorized holes and rerouting her water system. Her language was careful, lawyered up, but the meaning was clear. This was retaliation, and she was playing the long game. I spent the afternoon preparing my response. Scans of the soil reports, dated footage from the camera feeds, schematics from my moisture sensors, GPS overlays showing the exact depth and direction of the pipe. By nightfall, I had a 37-page packet ready to deliver in person to the municipal office the next morning. But that wasn't the only surprise. Later that evening, as I was reorganizing files on my old environmental consulting laptop, I came across a familiar name in a recent HOA board memo. Peter Grayson, Vice President of Golden Hills HOA. The name hit me like a kick to the gut. Peter and I had worked together nearly a decade ago at Pacific Environmental Corp., back before I turned my back on corporate remediation. He was a junior engineer back then, sharp, idealistic, good with numbers, and bad with politics. I hadn't seen or spoken to him since he left the company, and now here he was, sitting on the board of the same HOA that was trying to bury me under bureaucracy and bleach. I didn't call him, not yet. I needed to confirm it was really him. The next morning, I dropped off my documentation at the zoning office, signed a statement affirming my response, and walked out feeling like I'd just passed the bar exam. On my way back, I took a detour through the neighborhood, Karen's palace looming like a white marble tumor on the hillside, and spotted Peter in the distance, standing near the HOA clubhouse, clipboard in hand, talking to some contractor. I parked, walked over like it was no big deal, and called out, "Grayson?" He turned. His face went pale. "Clark?" he said. "No way. What the hell?" We shook hands awkwardly, like two soldiers bumping into each other after a messy war. He looked older, lines around the eyes, a receding hairline, but the same. "You live around here?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I pointed over my shoulder, the non-compliant compost castle down the hill. "That's me." He winced. "Oh man, that's your land." "Yep," I said, "and I think your HOA president's been fertilizing it the hard way." He looked around nervously, then leaned in. "Look, I'm not involved in the drainage stuff. I'm mostly on paper. Karen handles all the exterior projects. I just help with budgeting and vendor contracts." "But you've seen the permits, right?" I asked. He hesitated. "There are no permits," he said quietly. "At least not the kind the county would accept." My jaw tightened. "I tried raising concerns last year when they installed the new patio pumps," Peter continued. "Said the discharge plan didn't make sense. Karen shut me down fast. Said it was all handled by the contractor, some private firm she used. She has people wrapped around her finger, Clark. I know what she's like, but she steamrolls every vote, runs meetings like she's the mayor." I crossed my arms. "Then why stay on the board?" Peter sighed. "Honestly, I was hoping to keep an eye on things. Thought maybe I could steer her away from something catastrophic. But she's been building this web for years." I looked at him for a long second. "I don't need you to blow a whistle today, Pete. But if this goes legal, and it's going to, then people are going to be asking questions. And you need to figure out whose side you're really on." He nodded slowly. "Just don't burn the place down yet, okay?" "No promises," I said. That night, I got an email from an anonymous address. No message, just a zipped file. Inside, meeting notes, vendor invoices, photos of the patio renovation, and 3 internal emails between Karen and the contractor, referencing cost-saving plumbing solutions and bypassing city red tape. The metadata confirmed it all came from the HOA's cloud storage. Peter had chosen a side. The next day, I received a second notice. Karen was escalating her complaint, now accusing me of malicious interference with HOA property and infrastructure. She cited an unauthorized filtration system on my border and accused me of running unlicensed water diversion equipment. Cute. I responded with a new report, this one including the leaked HOA documents, with sender anonymized, of course, time-stamped pipe footage, and environmental consultant commentary from my former firm. The language was sterile, professional, bulletproof. Karen wasn't trying to hide her strategy anymore. She wanted me buried under bureaucracy, hoping I'd back down before things went public. She'd underestimated my patience and my data archives. She wasn't dealing with just a homeowner. She was dealing with a former engineer who once mapped contaminant flow from an oil refinery across 2 counties using nothing but rainfall records, a pH stick, and a goddamn notebook. This was going to be fun. Karen made one critical miscalculation. She assumed I would respond like the average HOA subjugated homeowner. Apologize, comply, maybe write a stern post on Nextdoor and pray for some divine intervention. What she didn't know, or forgot, was that I'd spent nearly 2 decades in environmental containment. I don't hope for justice. I build it out of PVC, concrete, and federal regulation. The day I received confirmation from the county's environmental liaison that I could proceed with soil stabilization efforts under the Protective Measures Clause, Section 47.9 of the county's emergency response guidelines, I got to work. Officially, I was installing a temporary erosion control system. Unofficially, I was building a high-efficiency, fully legal vengeance mechanism. I hired a crew. Not the usual suburban landscaping guys who roll up with leaf blowers and arguments about sprinkler heads. No, these were old contacts, blue-collar hydrologists and earthworks contractors I'd worked with back in my field days. Is the kind of people who didn't ask many questions as long as the check cleared and the measurements were precise. We poured reinforced concrete along the upper perimeter of my property, forming a U-shaped retaining trench backed by a subgrade hydraulic barrier membrane. It looked like a flood control basin from a distance. Neighbors asked if I was worried about mudslides. "Just getting ready for climate change," I said with a smile. But the real genius lay in the reverse drainage grid, installed right at the border with discrete inlets angled uphill. Beneath those, a small pump array, solar-powered and motion-activated, timed to detect incoming discharge through the pipe and return it, through the same conduit, back to sender, to her. The flow reversal began 3 days after the concrete cured. That morning, my sensors registered a spike: chlorine, ammonia, high turbidity. I watched on the feed as the valve kicked in. The trench filled, pressurized, and sent the fluid hurtling back uphill through her little chemical snake hole. 12 hours later, the screaming started. I was in my workshop polishing a rusted hoe I'd found buried in a mulch pile when I heard the sirens. Fire department, code enforcement, even a sheriff unit, all clustered outside the Hopkins mansion like it had been hit by a gas leak. Karen was standing on her driveway in a bathrobe, soaked to the knees in brown sludge. Her pool guy stood beside her, gesturing toward the slope with panic in his eyes. I could only imagine the scene inside. Backed up drains, bubbling toilets, a pool that now smelled like the inside of a septic tank. By sundown, a van labeled round-the-clock emergency restoration and biohazard services was parked outside her garage. The pipe was doing its job. She tried again the next day. I saw the telltale pulses at 10:30 p.m., likely her spa system on an automatic cycle. I let the trench fill, then activated the second pump manually. Pressure doubled. The next morning, half her lawn was yellow. By day 3, her basement had flooded again. One of the contractors stomped across the property line to confront me, shouting about illegal backflow engineering. I handed him a printed copy of the county permit. He read it, squinted, and muttered, "Damn, this is airtight." Karen called the cops. 2 officers showed up mid-afternoon, their expressions the kind that said, "We're here because we have to be." She rattled off a litany of accusations: sabotage, malicious intent, harassment, some nonsense about reverse sewage terrorism. I showed the officers my paperwork, gave them a glass of cold lemonade, and walked them through the entire setup. All legal, all documented. They left 15 minutes later. Karen stood on her porch, mouth twitching like she was chewing bees. By week's end, her underdeck utility closet was ruined. Her HVAC unit shorted out, and her insurance company had started asking awkward questions. I knew because I'd seen the adjuster poking around with a clipboard and a look of terminal disappointment. That night, I installed a motion-triggered speaker at the border wall. Whenever movement was detected, it played a pleasant chime followed by a calm, computerized voice. Caution: unauthorized discharge detected, returning contents to point of origin. Thank you for your cooperation. Just loud enough to be heard through her open bathroom windows. She was losing it. And the best part? I hadn't broken a single law. My system wasn't aggressive. It was defensive. It didn't inject anything, didn't add pressure beyond what her system provided. It simply blocked and bounced, like a rubber wall with plumbing. The HOA filed a cease and desist. I responded with an affidavit, 14 supporting documents, and a cover letter quoting the precise language from the EPA's Clean Water Act Compliance Guidelines, Section 3, Paragraph C, the right to prevent intrusion of foreign contaminants through mechanical, passive, or automated means when those contaminants originate from adjacent properties. I copied the county and the state and EPA regional enforcement. Karen didn't send any more letters after that. But I wasn't done. No, not by a long shot. After the second flooding of her basement and the now infamous incident where a real estate agent accidentally stepped ankle-deep into what he thought was decorative gravel but turned out to be chemically soaked runoff, Karen disappeared for 2 days. Her compound went dark. No lights, no staff, no tennis lessons, just one lonely Range Rover left on the driveway and a closed for maintenance sign zip-tied to her gate like she was running a goddamn spa instead of a biohazard zone. I should have enjoyed the quiet, but silence from Karen Hopkins was never a truce. It was a reload. On Monday morning, a municipal notice appeared on my fence, stamped, signed, and absurd. A formal cease and desist on all unauthorized soil engineering and property modifications without neighborhood review. The letter was written in almost laughably aggressive legalese, citing Golden Hills HOA. Regulations as if they held federal weight. Attached was a copy of the complaint. My erosion barrier was infringing upon the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood, and my filtration trench was operating as a disruptive water weapon. I leaned against the post, reread the phrase, water, weapon 3 times, then went inside and brewed myself the strongest cup of black tea I could muster without tearing the filter. I'd been accused of a lot in my life, but being a one-man eco-artillery division was a first. 2 hours later, I was at my lawyer's office downtown. Brenda J., Maldonado, civil defense, former environmental litigator, and the only person I knew who kept a bonsai tree and a katana on her bookshelf. Not decorative. She'd represented me before, years ago, when a subcontractor tried to blame me for a failed wastewater treatment bid in Santa Rosa. She'd eaten that guy alive. Brenda took one look at the notice and snorted. "Clark, this isn't even enforceable," she said, flipping through it. "They're citing HOA aesthetic codes in a non-member case. You're not subject to their bylaws, and your construction is fully documented and permitted by the county." "She's getting desperate," I said. Brenda nodded. "Which means she's going to make a mistake soon. A big one." She was right. That same evening, I received a phone call from a blocked number. Normally, I don't answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Mr. Barrows," said a clipped voice on the other end. "This is Jonathan Weiner. I represent Mrs. Hopkins and the Golden Hills Homeowners Association." I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing. "What can I do for you, Mr. Weiner?" "I'm calling as a courtesy. My client believes this dispute has escalated unnecessarily, and we would prefer to resolve it amicably. Mrs. Hopkins is prepared to offer a mutual de-escalation, removal of your drainage modifications, in exchange for a commitment from her end to address the runoff situation via internal HOA channels. Translation: take it down, and we'll pretend none of this ever happened." I paused. "You mean the illegal discharge of chemical contaminants from her property into mine?" There was a beat of silence. He cleared his throat. "Alleged discharge. No formal charges have been filed." "Yet," I said. He sighed. "Mr. Barrows, this doesn't need to become a spectacle. We believe this entire situation could be resolved without litigation." "Good," I said, "because we're not resolving it with compromise. We're resolving it in court. Your client violated state and federal environmental law. She contaminated my property. She lied to inspectors. And now she's trying to weaponize bureaucratic nonsense to cover her tracks." "You're making a mistake," he said, voice hardening. "No," I said, "she did, and you're going to find yourself knee-deep in it before long." Click. The next day, the county's Environmental Protection Office notified me that a secondary review of HOA permits had been triggered. Someone had submitted documents in Karen's name that conflicted with previous records. The name on the filing? Jonathan Weiner. Turns out Mr. Weiner had submitted HOA internal compliance forms that directly contradicted both the county's records and the permits Karen claimed she had during the inspector's first visit. That was a red flag so bright it practically burned the paper. 2 days later, I received an anonymous delivery in a thick manila envelope. Scanned emails between Weiner and the HOA's private contractor discussing streamlining the compliance narrative and retrofitting old permits to match current runoff. The files included a draft memo labeled, "Create backdated drainage summary. Note, do not include pipe references." The signature, J.W. That same night, I got a second drop, digital this time, from an untraceable Proton mail address. HOA internal documentation, meeting minutes, expense logs, and one thread that chilled me. "Need Grayson to sign off on new environmental sheet. He's quiet lately. Poke him if he stalls." Peter Grayson, the guy I used to mentor, still feeding me from the inside. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't need to. His message was clear. Keep going. There's more rot under the surface. The next morning, I called Brenda and forwarded everything. By noon, she had filed for a formal environmental injunction and notified the district attorney's office of potential permit fraud. Weiner was about to be cornered, and Karen. She had no idea her own people were starting to slip. It started with a plain white sedan idling on the far side of the cul-de-sac. Windows up, no HOA stickers, no contractor logos. Just a driver in a rumpled collared shirt, sunglasses, and the stiff posture of someone not used to being watched. I stood at the edge of my property, hands on my hips, and waited. Within 5 minutes, the sedan rolled up and parked in front of my gate. 2 people stepped out, one male, one female, both carrying leather briefcases, and very bad news. "Mr. Clark Barrows?" the woman asked. Her voice was firm, professional. "Depends who's asking." She flipped a badge. "Environmental Protection Agency, Regional Office. We're following up on a federal complaint involving cross-property discharge, unpermitted waste management, and alleged permit falsification tied to your HOA." I smiled, not because I was surprised, but because it was finally happening. "Of course," I said. "Come on in." I took them through everything. From the first night, the soil steamed like a bio-witch's cauldron, to the pipe discovery, to the chemical logs, to the full schematic of my reverse flow system. They asked questions, smart ones. The man, Patel, focused on legal details. The woman, Ramirez, seemed to already know where this was heading. When I showed them the documents from the anonymous drop, the emails, the fake compliance forms submitted by Wiener, they exchanged a glance that made the air in my lungs feel heavy. "You understand," Ramirez said, "that if this holds up an audit, your HOA board may be facing charges of coordinated permit fraud." "Not my HOA," I corrected. She nodded once. "Even worse for them." 3 hours later, they were gone. 48 hours after that, the EPA formally requested internal documents from the Golden Hills HOA as part of a widening investigation into neighborhood-level environmental violations. That's when the real cracks started to show. Karen didn't just panic. She went nuclear. Suddenly, every mailbox in the neighborhood had a glossy flyer shoved into it. "A community under siege, defending our values against extremism." It had my name, my property, even a screenshot from one of my YouTube garden tutorials, cropped to make. Me look like a ranting survivalist. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to turn this into a smear campaign, a last-ditch HOA psyop to make me the villain. It didn't work, because 2 days later, Jonathan Wiener cracked. Word reached me through Brenda First, official tip-off from the DA's office. Apparently, under pressure from the EPA and in light of the falsified permit trails tied to his own signature, Wiener had requested an emergency deposition. In exchange for reduced liability, he gave a full sworn statement admitting to knowingly submitting backdated and falsified compliance documents, participating in Karen's strategy to delay regulatory review by citing internal pending approvals, instructing HOA contractors to omit pipework in updated schematics. And most damning of all, he named Karen Hopkins as the sole initiator and executive authority behind all drainage modifications and discharges. He didn't just throw her under the bus. He slid under the wheels with a confession and a notarized map. That same week, I received an encrypted email again from a burner account containing video footage of a private HOA board meeting. The file had no metadata, no timestamp, but the faces were clear. Karen, 3 board members, and, at the corner of the table, Peter Grayson. Karen, mid-sentence, clearly says, "The county doesn't need to see every damn pipe. We'll just call it legacy drainage and move on. If Clark gets nosy, I'll bury him in legal noise." Silence followed. Then Peter's voice. "We're committing fraud, Karen." "Karen, it's HOA optimization." That recording made its way to the EPA by the next morning. Within 72 hours, the Golden Hills HOA received an injunction halting all construction and waste management operations until further federal review. Karen's property was sealed for inspection. Her spa, pool system, and underdeck filtration unit were taken offline by order of the Department of Health. I watched from my workshop window as 3 men in hazmat suits wheeled a containment drum down her driveway. Karen stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes blank. For the first time in months, she didn't yell, she didn't flinch. She just watched the empire she'd built on chlorine and arrogance dissolve into federal custody. Wiener went silent after his deposition. His law firm issued a press release about compliance missteps and structural oversight. In legal terms, that's like waving a white flag and setting your own office on fire. Peter and I still hadn't spoken face-to-face since that first run-in near the clubhouse, but I knew he was the one who leaked the video. No one else would have had the guts and the access. He may have started as a reluctant cog in the HOA machine, but now he'd helped grease its dismantling. And Karen, she finally shut her mouth, because now the ones asking questions weren't neighbors with compost bins. They were federal investigators with subpoenas. The courthouse smelled like waxed linoleum and slow paperwork, the kind of place where things grind forward not with drama, but with the dry inevitability of legal machinery. And yet, here we were. Karen Hopkins, president of the now crippled Golden Hills HOA, seated at the defense table with a freshly appointed public relations lawyer, and me, in a jacket I hadn't worn since my sister's wedding, sitting behind Brenda as. She leafed through a binder fat enough to stop a bullet. It wasn't the criminal trial yet. That would come later. This was the first major civil hearing, Barrows v. Hopkins et al., to determine liability, restitution, and whether Karen's actions qualified for environmental damages under both state and federal statutes. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Brenda opened with a quiet sledgehammer of a statement. She laid out the facts in calm professional rhythm: unauthorized discharge of chlorinated wastewater, deliberate concealment of drainage architecture, forged permits submitted to municipal and county offices, active use of private property for waste, dispersal and retaliation via fabricated claims. Then she dropped the kicker: the video. Karen's lawyer, a wiry man with a permanent squint and the air of a man who had been called in very late, objected to the footage. "Lacks authentication, Your Honor. We don't know when this was recorded." Brenda smiled like a cobra about to yawn. "We do now," she said, and handed over an affidavit signed by Peter Grayson, who had come forward officially the day before. His statement included chain of custody on the HOA meeting footage, the date of the board session, and his own verbal testimony that he'd been present when Karen said the words, "We'll just call it legacy drainage and move on." That room went quiet, like someone had sucked the air out. Karen stared forward, expression flat, but her hand was shaking. Her fingers clenched the edge of the defense table, white-knuckled. She didn't look at her lawyer. She didn't look at me. Just at the wall. The judge, a woman with years of environmental rulings under her belt and no patience for suburban tyranny, leaned back in her chair and asked a simple question. "Mrs. Hopkins, do you deny making this statement?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then said the only thing she could. "I don't recall." That was the moment I knew we'd already won. Not because of the smug legal dance, not because of the documents, not even because of the EPA experts who testified right after. We won because she lied, and badly. And in court, bad liars get buried. Wiener's deposition was submitted in full. It was thorough, embarrassing, and made clear he'd only acted under Karen's direction. He even provided time-stamped email chains with directives like delay inspection, "We'll forge the plumbing certs," and my personal favorite, "Clark is watching, disable access." Each one read like a nail being driven into a coffin. Karen's team tried to mount a defense, blamed rogue contractors, miscommunication, HOA mismanagement, but the EPA's lead investigator took the stand and, with surgical precision, dismantled every excuse. Mrs. Hopkins' system was not just non-compliant, he said, flipping through a thick file. It was maliciously non-compliant, built to intentionally redirect waste to an adjacent property. This qualifies as targeted environmental sabotage. By the third day, Karen was flanked by two defense attorneys, one of them visibly sweating through his collar. And then came the trap. Brenda submitted a motion to unseal HOA financial records tied to unauthorized environmental expenditures. That's when Karen snapped. She actually stood up in court and yelled, "This is a circus. That man built a moat. He's been attacking my home. I'm the victim here." The judge stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Sit down, Mrs. Hopkins," she said. "You will remain silent unless addressed." Karen sat, slowly. But the damage was done. It turned out there were hidden expenses, over $98,000 billed under landscaping repair, which matched payments to the same contractor who'd installed the illegal pipe. Brenda circled the numbers in red, passed it to the judge, and sat down like she was closing a ledger. The ruling came in the next day, liable on all counts. Karen was ordered to pay restitution for environmental remediation and property damage totaling $486,000, fund the removal and detoxification of the contaminated slope at her own cost, pay an additional $250,000 in punitive damages for knowingly committing an act of environmental harm. But that wasn't the worst of it. As the ruling was being read, a second group of people walked into the courtroom. 2 EPA agents and a man from the California Office of Environmental Crime Prosecution. Karen's face froze. She was served on the spot. 6 federal charges, 3 state, 1 pending grand jury indictment. It was the first time I saw Karen truly speechless. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already gathering. Someone must have leaked the verdict. Maybe Peter, maybe someone in the EPA's press division. Cameras clicked. Microphones came out. I ducked most of it, but one reporter managed to catch me by the exit. "Mr. Barrows, any comment on today's decision?" I looked straight into the camera, smiled just enough to be dangerous, and said, "This wasn't about lawns. It was about poison. And now it's about justice." The demolition crew arrived 2 weeks later. Not on my property, but at Karen's. 3 white trucks, all marked with biohazard environmental solutions, parked in front of the Hopkins estate like it was ground zero for a chemical spill. And in a way, it was. The spa was the first to go. Workers in hazmat suits drained the sludge, then cut the fiberglass shell apart with industrial saws, each scream of the blade echoing down the once pristine cul-de-sac like a eulogy for suburban delusion. Karen wasn't there to see it. She was already in county lockup, denied bail after the first round of charges stuck. Turns out lying under oath and tampering with environmental documentation isn't just frowned upon, it's enough for the feds to toss the key for a while. The final tally? 6 years federal time with possible parole after 4. Personal assets frozen pending civil restitution. Her home officially classified as environmentally compromised, unsellable without full remediation and clearance from the California Department of Public Health. HOA Golden Hills placed under full audit and administrative receivership. 4 board members removed, 2 facing their own charges for accessory fraud. And me? I got a check, a very large one. After the settlement funds cleared and the lien was placed on Karen's estate, I received the full restitution amount, plus EPA-authorized compensation for distress, loss of use, and environmental restoration. That was over $700,000 after taxes, more than enough to fix my land. But I didn't just fix it. I turned it into something no HOA would ever dare touch again. At the edge of my 6-acre property, where the contaminated slope had once soaked and steamed like hell's garden hose, I built something new, the Green Border Initiative, a publicly viewable, privately managed ecological buffer zone. Raised beds, filtration trenches, native plants, educational panels. Local schools began visiting. Environmental science students from the nearby college volunteered to maintain sensors and test soil health. The county loved it. The state recognized it. The federal government funded it. I became, by bureaucratic accident and poetic irony, a regional environmental ambassador. The garden that Karen tried to poison was now on the news. I never saw her again. I heard she tried to appeal, but the judge wrote a line that still makes me grin every time I think about it. It made the Sacramento Bee under quote of the week. You attempted to turn someone else's land into your sewer. What returned to you was not vengeance, it was consequence. The Hopkins property stayed empty. The sign out front faded in the sun. Needs complete gut remodel. Biohazard. A realtor came by once, asked me if I'd be interested in buying it cheap. No, I said, but I'll rent it for compost storage. He didn't laugh, but I did. As for Peter Grayson, he didn't just avoid charges, he became my partner, officially. With the investigation behind us, he helped me scale the Green Border into other neighborhoods, consulting, designing passive runoff prevention, hosting seminars for HOA-free developments. He told me it felt like penance. I told him it felt like justice. Brenda framed the first EPA report and sent it to me in a box with a note. Next time someone dumps literal shit on you, charge by the gallon. I hung it in the workshop. And above the entrance to my garden, where people now come to learn about soil, water, and how to fight back with facts and patience, I installed a metal plaque, simple, clean, with carved letters that caught the sun just right. We return everything you send our way, including your problems. I don't believe in revenge, but nature. Nature always finds a way to balance things out.